Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to be studying Chamishi and Parshas Vayishlach, the story of Dinah and Shechem. It's on page, if you have the Chumashim, it's on page 180. It's Perek Lamed Daled. For all intents and purposes, it's Perek Lamed Daled. We all know the story, so I'm not going to read the story. We're very familiar, but it's a very tragic story, and it deserves a real focus. And the Rav analyzes the story from two perspectives. He's concerned only about two issues when he looks at this story of Shechem and Dinah, of Dinah being raped by Shechem. Number one, he wants to know in the story who promotes the shidduch. Promotes the shidduch is his father, Shechem's father, Hamor. And he wants to facilitate the marriage between Dinah and his son Shechem after Shechem raped Dinah. And Yaakov was considered, he couldn't understand. The Rav wanted to understand, why would Hamor want this relationship? Yaakov is considered a foreigner, and that would be totally inappropriate for the son of the ruling family of the community. It's just not the right yichus. Why would he want it? And so the Rav wants to understand what motivated Hamor to allow and to even pursue this relationship. Or better said, we will see what is in it for Hamor. That's what the Rav wants to do, wants to know. That's question one that the Rav is going to analyze. And question two, Shimon and Levi take a brutal revenge against the city of Shechem. They wipe out all the men, right? They wipe them out. But how many people committed the sin? One man, Shechem. Does the entire community deserve, on a moral level, does it justify that one person commits the crime and everybody gets punished? Those are the two questions. Again, what is in it for Hamor that he's promoting what would seem to be a shidduch that he shouldn't want? And number two, Shimon and Levi take the brutal revenge against a city when only one man committed the crime. How do we understand this on a moral level? So let's begin the discussion of what's in it for Hamor. Why is he facilitating the marriage, the shidduch between his son Shechem and Yaakov's daughter Dinah? And the whole discussion is based on one pasuk. If you take a look in the parsha, it's Lamed Daled Yud Beis. Lamed Daled Yud Beis, so it's on 182. This is where the Rav focuses based, because this is where the Medrash uses this pasuk as its platform to discuss this whole issue of why Hamor would want this shidduch. What does he say? This is Hamor speaking to Yaakov. Harbu alai me'od mohar umatan ve'na kasher tomru elai utnu li et hanara leisha. And he says, well, inflate exceedingly upon me the marriage settlement. Decide whatever you want, whatever cost you want for this marriage, whatever the amount of money you believe is appropriate, and any gifts that you want, and I'll give whatever you tell me. I'm willing to pay. Hamor says, whatever it is, I want this shidduch between my son and your daughter. The only thing I ask is, give me the maiden for a wife. That's the pasuk. So what's Hamor? Hamor's willing to pay anything at any level. He wants the shidduch. Okay. So now let's understand. The Medrash offers an amazing observation. It's the Medrash in Vayishlach Zion. The Medrash addresses why Hamor would want the shidduch at all. What is it in? What does he have in? What benefit is there to Hamor to promote and even pursue this shidduch? What's going to personally benefit Hamor? That's the Medrash wants to know. So the Medrash says, Hamor said to Yaakov, Avraham, your grandfather was a Nasi Elohim. Your grandfather, Avram, your grandfather, was a Nasi Elohim. And I'm a Nasi Haaretz. That's the conversation you can see. Hamor comes to see Yaakov. He says, your grandfather, Avram, he was a Nasi Elohim. And I'm a Nasi Haaretz. Clearly, what is Hamor suggesting? Hamor is suggesting we both come from appropriate yichus. We both are appropriate for each other. The Medrash, however, continues and says, Yaakov answered Hamor the following: you think my grandfather was a Nasi? That's why you think we have good yichus? I want to tell you who my grandfather was. He wasn't a Nasi. He was a Shiur. What's a shore? An ox. He was, what do you mean by that? He was a servant like an ox. The pasuk says, Vel habakar ratz Avraham. He ran like, right? He was a worker. Avram ran like to bring the shore, the ox. Avram didn't sit back. And if you're in a sea, everything comes to you, right? Everybody serves you. They're now seeing in the palace in Syria what Assad had, right? While everybody else is suffering, it was a Hitler. It was just like a Hitler. I don't know why it took so many years to topple this man, but okay, he was a Hitler. And that's what they're seeing. Exactly. He was the brutal murderer of hundreds of thousands of people, right? And everything, why am I saying that? Because when you're a Nasi, when you're the boss, everything comes to you. So what's Yaakov saying about, you think my grandfather was like, you think like you understand a Nasi? He sits in a palace and everybody serves him. That wasn't my grandfather. My grandfather was a worker. He was a shore. He was El Habakar Rotz Avram. He wasn't sitting there on a throne and everybody was serving him. He was serving them. He was like a shore. He was like an ox. Is saying, you think it's a good shidduch because your conception of Nasi is not who my grandfather was. That's what Yaakov says. You got it wrong. You got it wrong. So to explain this medrash and its brilliance in understanding the diversity of men in the world, the Rav quotes a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Hey on the base, 5b. There it differentiates between the role of a shore, an ox on the one hand, and what's the man's name? Hamor. A Hamor. He's a donkey. So the Medrash, the Rav quotes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that differentiates between the shore, which he has now compared his grandfather, Avraham to. Avraham was he was like an ox, he was a worker. And the Hamor, which is the name of the man talking to him, right? The father of Shem. And the Gemara says the following. La'olam yasim adam atzmo al divrei Torah kishor. A person should always make himself like an ox. What does a shore do? La'ol. The shore acts like the yoke. He's the one who literally lifts and does the hard work. V'kachamor lamasoi. And you act like a donkey in carrying something. The worker is like the shore. When you work like a shore. When you have to maintain, you have to take the product to the marketplace, you act like a chamor. A shore is a worker, a chamor is a carrier. The ox plows the wheat, while the donkey carries the wheat that's processed to the marketplace. One should therefore, the Gemara says, make himself like a shore when it comes to creativity, right? But like a chamor when it comes to maintenance. That's how the Rav interprets that Gemara. The Gemara is telling you, you work like a shore in creativity, but like a chamor in maintenance. That's you're going to carry. And the Rav noted that the truth is, we shouldn't be so surprised. We shouldn't be so surprised at all because we've seen these people. We've seen them very well. They were the ones who came to America who just had a few pennies in their pocket after the Holocaust, or during the 20th century. They came from Europe and they had nothing to their names. And yet, what did they build? They built unbelievable lives from nothing. They had to really act like how? A shore, a chamor, like a shore. They looked like Avraham. It demanded of them enormous patience. Plowing demands an enormous commitment, patience, and hard labor. And nothing happens quickly. It's slow process. These people that came over from the Holocaust did not become wealthy overnight. They did not become wealthy overnight at all. Very hardworking. We're sitting in the Nagel Library, right? A fascinating story about Jack Nagel. It took him decades to build up the parnasa that he finally was zochet to have. But it was like a shore. He worked like that ox with enormous patience and enormous work, and they were not wealthy when they came. They didn't have a penny to their name, but they built it and they built it and they built it. It demanded of them enormous patience, hard work, and they built our communities at the same time, didn't they? On the other hand, there are people like the Rav notes, the chamor, the donkey. They go to work when everything is built. It's already built. They go to work because their role is to carry everything on once the business is going. They carry on and maintain that which was built. Who built them? The first generation. This is also an important in life. Being a chamor is also important. But they aren't the visionaries. They aren't the builders, the Rav says. Rather, they sustain what the Shiur plowed and built. And the Rav labeled them the second generation. That's what the Rav writes. They are lacking the talent of the first generation. The first generation, their parents, they were the builders that built from nothing. They can't do that kind of work, the second generation. The second generation are the chamor. They only which was built before them. The truth is, there are some people who are neither the Shiur nor the chamor, but the Medrash doesn't. The Medrash is only interested in the chamor and the Shiur. So again, the chamor himself comes to Yaakov and he says, I want the chidduch. Why? Because your grandfather was a Nasi Elohim. And what does Yaakov respond? You got it wrong. My grandfather was the Shiur. He wasn't the Nasi. You have an impression a Nasi has, everything given to him. He sits there at the palace. Everything is delivered to his table. No, that wasn't my grandfather. My grandfather was El Habakar Rotz Avraham. The Medrash was teaching us that Avraham Avinu was the paradigm of this Shiur personality. When the Torah tells us that Avraham was a Nasi Elohim, it means to tell us that he became a Nasi, not as a Yoresh, but as an ox, as a Shiur, as a person who worked hard for it. He received nothing on a silver platter, nothing. He received nothing from his ancestors. That's what the Medrash is telling us. Yaakov is telling him, I'm going to tell you about my grandfather. Since you brought up my grandfather, I'll tell you about my grandfather. My grandfather received nothing in an inheritance. Rather, he built it all by himself. He was like these Jews who came with nothing in their pocket. That's who Avram he was. And the Medrash goes on. He was one wherever he went, he would build Vayiven Sham Mizbeach Vayikra B'Shem Hashem. At every turn of Avram's life, he had to sacrifice himself, didn't he? He had test after test after test of his life. And that's exactly what these survivors went through. Exactly. He went down to Egypt. He had to perform the Akedah. He confronted Sodom and Amraphel. Bottom line, he created everything on his own. He was like a human Shiur. That is exactly who my grandfather was. Avram became the model of the Jewish people. This is what now the Medrash is teaching us. And this, the Rav says, is what, if you will, Yaakov is telling Chamor. I'm going to explain to you our people, because we became the ancestors of Avraham. He set it all in motion, and he impacted on our very existence, how we live. Knesset Yisrael has the same trajectory as Avraham. Our whole existence is one of having to build and rebuild, to build and rebuild. We came to Eretz Yisrael, we built the Beis Hamikdash, and after 400 years, it was destroyed. We had to come back and build it again. Again, it was destroyed. The cycle simply seems not to stop. That is the story of the Rabbi Akiva story, right? 24,000 Talmidim, the Gemara says. And what did he do? He lost them all, and he rebuilds with the next 5, right? 4 or 5 students he takes under his wing, and he rebuilds Klal Yisrael. That's the story of Klal Yisrael. That's the story that Yaakov is telling Chamor. Chamor, you don't get it. You have to understand our personality. We're Ve'el Habokar Rotz Avram. We're from that mold. Avram and his descendants never sat, the meat didn't come on the table. The meat wasn't waiting for them on the table. Ve'el Habokar Rotz Avram. You want the meat? You better go out and get it. You're going to run and you're going to work and you're going to work hard. You're going to bring the bakar on your own to the table. Nobody is bringing it for you. You, Chamor, don't get that. You don't understand. And that is why the Medrash pictures that is the response from Yaakov to Chamor. He told Chamor, Avram was true. Oh, he was a Nasi Elohim, but he wasn't a Yoresh. You're a Yoresh, Hamor. My grandfather wasn't a Yoresh. Yaakov told Hamor, if you want to be my mechutin, guess what you're going to have to do? Adopt my lifestyle. Hamor can't adopt his lifestyle. You can't adopt that kind of a lifestyle. It's impossible. You're a Hamor and I'm a Shur, and they don't go together. As we're going to see in a few moments, what's the pasuk? You don't plow, you don't use a Hamor and a Shur together in the field. Don't unite them. It doesn't work. Now we can appreciate the following story the Rav told, how he uses this lesson in shidduch situations. And I quote to you the Rav. The Rav related, the truth is that Yaakov used what Yaakov used on Hamor, I use also. He says, I use the same thing. This is what he tells us. The Rav was brought to Boston in 1932 to be the head of what Boston was called the Chevra Shas of Boston. So you knowing that, you'll hear understand the Chevra Shas was, he became the chief rabbi of the Orthodox community and it was called the Chevra Shas. I remember in Chevra Shas, there was an officer, a macher. I remember I came to him to collect money for the yeshiva. What's he talking about? Maimonides. The Rav wanted to build Maimonides. It was a revolution of its time. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to build Maimonides.
What?
So he goes. So he goes to
with the Rav?
Yeah.
the Rav. Shh, mute yourself, please. I remember in the Chevra Shas, there was an officer, a macher. I remember I came to him to collect money for the yeshiva. He said to me, this person, this macher, I came for the money. What do you need a yeshiva for, Rabbi? What's lacking in town? I said to him, what are you talking about? The children have to learn how to learn Gemara. He said to me, what do you need to learn Gemara for? My son never learned Gemara. He makes a living and he can daven too. He's a professor and he lacks nothing. A few years later, that same macher came to see me, the Rav says. He said to me, do you remember my son that I told you about that became the professor? He wants to marry a Goya. That's what the Rav is repeating. He wants to marry a Goya. I thought to myself, this is what comes out of not learning Gemara, if you will, right? Then the Rav continues. The first thing, when a mother and a father come to tell me that their son or daughter wants to marry a Goy or a Goya, I always ask them, never mind your son and your daughter. What do you think? The Rav asks. What do you think about the shidduch? Are you happy with the shidduch? I ask. And they say to me, Rebbe, to me, it's horrible. I'd prefer to die. So I say to them, if that is so, then I have one good advice for you, one eitzah. You are the mechutanim. To whom? You're going to be mechutanim to whom? To a Yankee? Or to a person from Connecticut? Go meet the mechutanim, and the shidduch will be bottled. It will end. You just meet with the future mechutanim. They'll go and meet with the Yankees. Go and meet the Connecticut people. Go and meet them. And kach havi, that's exactly what happens. They went to meet the mechutanim, and in no time, the shidduch was over, the Rav says. The shidduch is over because neither can understand the other. The Jew and the non-Jew come from a totally different outlook in life. They simply can't mix. They are incompatible, the Rav notes. And that's what Yaakov was telling Hamor. You want the shidduch, it makes no sense. It's not going to work. That's what the Medrash is saying. This is what Yaakov told Hamor. Yaakov said, you think Avram was an aristocrat? Lo nasi nikra elo shor. Don't think of him as an aristocrat. He's an ox. He's a hard worker. You, Yaakov is telling Hamor, you're the donkey. And then he told him, Velo sacharosh b'shor v'chamor yachtov. The pasuk says, you don't plow with an ox and a donkey together. So the Rav answered, first point, first point the Rav answers is, why did Hamor want it? Why did Hamor want this shidduch and promote it? He wanted it because he thought it was good yichus. And how does Yaakov respond? No, they're not compatible. They're not compatible. You're from the perspective of Hamor. I come from the inheritance of a Shiur. and a shor and chamor, you don't unite, go together. That's exactly how the Rav tackles the first issue in this story. Remember, there are two issues that the Rav has about the whole story. Number one, why would Chamor want it? And so we see why, because he thought it was good yichus. And he said, you don't understand the Jewish people. The Jewish people don't inherit anything. They inherited one thing, to be assured, to work hard. And that's what we are. And that's exactly what we did. Okay, the second issue the Rav deals with in this chapter is based on, let's take a look on Lamed Daled Chof Hey, page 184, Chof Hey. So what happens? So they tell them, get ready to, everybody has to take, all of the male have to do what? Have to have a milah. And that's why the Medrash, the Gemara says, the third day after milah is the most painful, because it says, they're keeling over. Yaakov, Shimon the Levi, Achei Dinah, and two sons of Yaakov, Shimon Levi, the brothers of Dinah, Ish Charbo, they take their swords in hand, Vayavo ala ir betach, Vayargo al kol zachar, and they trick the city, correct? Vayavo ala ir betach, Vayargo kol zachar, and they secured everything and they killed them all. They killed all of the men. So this raises three questions in this story. First and foremost, if it's only one person, if Shechem is the only one that committed the crime, how can there be a justification on Shimon and Levi's action? They come back and they do what? They literally wipe out the entire menfolk of this city. This seems to be immoral. How do we explain this? That's question one that we're going to have to deal with problem number two in this story, right? Problem number two is, how do we understand this part of the story? Question number two, what was Yaakov upset about? Because he gets angry. Take a look at the very end of the story. Lamed on page 184. Vayomer Yaakov Shimon Levi. Achartem osi lavi sheni bioshvei oretz baknani ubaprisi vani mesei misport venesvu alai vikuni venishmariti ani uvesi. What does Yaakov say? Yaakov said to Shimon Levi, you have made me stink, become odious among the people of the land, among the Canaanim and the Prizim. I'm a few in number, and they're now going to all do what? They're going to get together, and they're going to come and annihilate me and my household. So the Rav wants to know, what was Yaakov upset about when he screamed at Shimon and Levi? He really got upset. You can hear the tone of voice. He calls in Shimon and Levi after he finds out what they did. And he says, what in the did you do? Right? Did he disapprove of what they did on the grounds of morality? Or did he disapprove on what they did on the grounds of pragmatism? That's question number two we have to tackle. And question number three, what danger did the alliance that Hamor and Shechem present to the Jewish people? Why was Yaakov so upset with this shidduch? Why? Okay, let's make it work, right? But he couldn't. He couldn't swallow it because it was so abhorrent to Yaakov that there should be such a shidduch. Why? Again, three questions. First and foremost, if Shechem was a single person who committed a crime, how do we justify what Shimon and Levi did on a moral level? Did they do something morally correct? By the way, also in the story, what did they do? They tricked the enemy, right? They tricked the enemy. Is that allowed? Well, of course it is. Yeah. Of course it is. That is warfare. Warfare is to catch your opponent off guard. Warfare, that in the 6-day war, the Rav points this out in his comment on the side. He says his notes on this parsha seem to have come, his comments on this parsha seem to have come in 1968. So he's looking back and he's saying in 67, they screamed at Israel that we were immoral because we caught them off guard. Of course we caught them off guard. Who in the 6-day war, we took the offense, not the defense, right? We jumped the gun because we saw what was happening. No, so he says, What, we should have waited there like ducks in the pond to be killed. We wiped out their Air Force. And that was the smart thing in 1967. You do that, even though they'll scream later. Of course, that's exactly what you do. That's exactly what happened in Syria these past few weeks. Assad was caught off guard by the rebels. That's exactly what happened. The truth is, October 7th was a terrible story. On the opposite, we got caught off guard. We should never have got caught off guard. We were sleeping at the wheel, literally. It's mind-boggling what happened, but that's exactly what you do in war. You want to catch the opposition off guard. Okay, so now again, 3 questions. First, if Shechem is a single person, why do we justify wiping out all the men? Was Yaakov upset because of a moral issue with Shimon and Levi, or pragmatic? And number 3, what did Yaakov so oppose? What did he see? What was the danger in the alliance between Hamor and Shechem with Yaakov and our family, the Jewish people? So the first point the Rav notes is that when one person in a community commits a crime and no one in the community raises a protest, and this is based on a Rambam, by the way, the Rav quotes a Rambam, it is teaching us the crucial lesson, quote, and I quote the Rav, a conspiracy of silence is just as bad as a conspiracy of action. A conspiracy of silence is just as bad as a conspiracy of action. The Rav noted, and I quote him, this happened in Germany. Do you think that all the Germans were Nazis? Oh, no. I lived in Germany for many years. They were very decent people. I never encountered in Germany, and remember, the Rav gets his PhD from the University of Berlin in 1932, early 1932, the winter of 1931, 1932. He's getting his PhD, and then he comes to America. Okay. I never encountered, he says, in Germany, in the university, not a single instance of anti-Semitism in relationships between professor and students, between students and students. I never saw it, the Rav says. What happened? How could it be then? How did Nazi Germany happen? It happened only that they tolerated it. If you tolerate racism, if you tolerate inappropriate behavior, what happens? Finally, Hitler converted an entire people, an entire nation, because nobody spoke up. Nobody protested. Tolerance towards evil is just as bad as evil itself. The Rambam says this concept in Arevim Zeh Lozeh, in Hilchos Melachim, that each is responsible, the individual for the community and vice versa, the community for the yochid, for the individual. This is a universal principle. How many anti-Semites were there in Germany in the 1920s? A very small group, but no one actually tried to eliminate them. They didn't protest them.
Theologian.
Yeah.
First they came for the socialists.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. They were, no one ostracized them, he writes, not even the Social Democrats. They just said tolerance. If you practice tolerance, you have to, that is going to allow a Hitler to preach the extermination of the Jew and so forth and so on. And that's how Nazi Germany evolved. Then the Rav goes on. The Rambam says in Perek Tes in Hilchos Melachim, Mipnei zeh nischayvu kol ba'alei Shechem hariga. He says, the Rambam writes this. He writes this very thing in Hilchos Melachim Perek Zayin. That is why the Shechem was destroyed. The Shvatim executed the Baalei Shechem, committed an act of robbery, of kidnapping, and no one condemned it. The Rambam defends what Shimon and Levi did on a moral level. A conspiracy of silence is just as bad as a conspiracy of action, and everybody is held responsible. It's fascinating that the Rav then, in 1968, writes the following, and it's 1968, so just change the figures now to 2024, 2025. It's fascinating that the Rav discussed the rise in his lifetime of anti-Semitism in Black American community. Sure. That was what was happening. Yeah. This is true, he writes, historically. It has been corroborated. As far as the Black community is concerned now, they become anti-Semitic, he says. A large segment of the Black community is anti-Semitic. There's no doubt about it, he writes. Some of them are not inferior to Hitler and Goebbels, he writes. Unbelievable. The Rav is writing this. I read their leaflets, and they are written in the finest tradition of Goebbels, he writes. It's horrifying. The question is, what do their liberal leaders say? I want to know what their liberal leaders say in response to this. It's like Shechem and the residents of the city, the Rav writes. Jews forgot about it. After all, we are a wise people and an old people. We should learn from our experience. This is important for us because now we are seeing this anti-Semitism. Now I'm talking, and not the Rav anymore. It's important for us to realize that what the Rav wrote, that experience of Black anti-Semitism, and nobody spoke up, is the same problem we see now in the Democratic Party, in the left. It's conquering the academic world across the country, and nobody's protest. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. I shouldn't say nobody. To the credit of our government, of Congress, they have not kept quiet, and the government has not tolerated it. So it's not identical to what it was. Baruch Hashem, it is not. The government is defending the Jewish people, and they're trying to weed it out. This against Israel right now are unbelievable. I've talked
and
to
Trump
Dr.
is
Ellen.
going to take over.
Okay, please mute. Please mute.
Oh, but I mean,
Please
Trump
mute.
is going to save us.
Please mute.
God. I'm sorry.
Please
Go ahead.
mute. Please mute. This is important to understand that that was I was saying that the academic boycotts are unbelievable. I was just talking to one who is an outstanding academic at USC. He has the largest lab at USC, and I asked him point blank, Alan, are you seeing the boycotts? He says, of course we are. Of course we are. We feel it every day. We feel it every day. The boycott, and if you speak to the Israeli academics, it's unbelievable, but it's going beyond academics. And that's why, yeah, there is Baruch Hashem, because this is the Parsha, Parshas Vayishlach. Vayishlach, the very beginning talks about how we're to interact with an Esav. We learned that, and the Rav is using this story of Dinah and Shechem as a story in understanding the assimilation of the Jew into the non-Jewish world. So that's how the Rav understands it. So the second point that the Rav addresses in this story is how Yaakov responded. So the first point is, was there a moral problem with how Shimon and Levi responded? So the Rav is arguing no. And he's quoting the Rambam clearly that if in a community, a person commits a violation, a terrible sin, and nobody speaks up, the community is responsible. The community is responsible. And the Rambam says that's why Shimon and Levi were totally right. Nobody spoke up. There was a kidnapping and a rape of a girl, and nobody protested against what Shechem did. Nobody. And if nobody protests, you have every right to take revenge upon the whole community, because a conspiracy of silence turns into a Nazi Germany. That's exactly what happens. The second point that the Rav makes is, how did Yaakov respond? Was Yaakov upset with how Shimon and Levi did from a moral standpoint or from a pragmatic standpoint? And the Rav notes clearly, the Psukim are saying, the Yaakov had no problem with the morality issue. He felt it was impractical. It was a stupid strategic move. The Rav says the following: when you go to war, you better strategize well to win, or don't go to war. It's morally offensive, the Rav says, to go to war without strategizing properly that you're going to win. You don't just go out of an urge to fight. You go and you fight out the need to win the battle, or else you can't send your soldiers into battle. It's totally inappropriate. The leaders who are running the battle must have a strategy with one goal in hand, and they must think it out well. It must be to win. To win. And the Rav says Yaakov is turning to his brother sons, Shimon and Levi, and they're saying, you didn't think this out well. You went to battle and it was impractical. We're few and they're many. Who was right? I think Shimon and Levi actually were right, and Yaakov ends up not being correct per se, but it's a lesson for all generations as well, right? It's not just a story about itself. It turns out that Shimon and Levi were successful. Baruch Hashem, they were successful. And the deterrence was there. What was Yaakov worried about? Nothing doesn't repeat itself in life. Everybody was afraid what Hezbollah is going to do, what Iran's going to do, and Israel had to finally swallow and say, we got to win. And we can't worry about this concern, right? We can't be fearful. We have to go and we have to fight. And we went and fought, and Baruch Hashem. Now they're just saying that it's the first time this week I just read in numerous articles that finally Israelis are realizing, hey, they've won this battle. They've basically wiped out Hamas. They really have. They're really dismantling Hamas. All of the military opinions are Hamas has been wiped out. Yeah, and then unfortunately, we lost 7 boys, but that was in Lebanon. It was just an accident. Khalilah, it shouldn't happen. But the truth is, Hamas is dismantled. Hezbollah has been cut off its head, literally and figuratively. The Houthis, we still, I think, we haven't taken care of them. But Iran is on the run. Everybody was worried about, we better take care of Iran, literally and figuratively, in the real true sense. Hopefully we will. But it's unbelievable, right? But the Rav says Yaakov's concern was a pragmatic one that all Jewish armies for centuries have to consider. The leaders of the battle have to know we got to win. And if you're not ready to win, you can't go to war. You better strategize well. Finally, right? That was on the grounds of the pragmatic issue. The final point the Rav makes in the story is that Yaakov what was Yaakov so concerned? Why was he so opposed to the union between Shechem and Dinah? For one word, assimilation. Shechem was proposing a union that would have been a spiritual end to the infancy of our people. Judaism would never have taken off if Yaakov would have allowed a union between Shechem and Dinah. To fight against spiritual annihilation is just as important as a physical annihilation. And this was a story of spiritual annihilation. This has ramifications. Why are we so opposed to assimilation? Because it's the spiritual annihilation of our people. It just doesn't have a future when you have an assimilation. Judaism ends, and that's why Yaakov was bitterly opposed to making a shidduch between Shechem and Dinah. It cannot happen. It cannot happen because we are so opposites. We have a different trajectory than they do, and it can't happen because of the spiritual lesson. So the Rav looks at the whole story of Dinah from 2 perspectives again. The first concern the Rav wanted to understand is what motivated Hamor in the story. What motivated Hamor to want to promote a shidduch between his son and Dinah and Yaakov's people in Yaakov's family? And that's question 1. And question number 2, the response that Shimon and Levi did in wiping out all of the menfolk. The Rav studied only that element of the story as well. That was point number 2 that the Rav studied from 3 perspectives. He wanted to know, was there a moral right to what they did? Is there moral justification to wiping out everybody if one man commits the crime? And the Rav makes a very good argument. It was totally moral when the society sees a a crime and keeps quiet. You can't keep quiet. What was Yaakov upset about? Then Shimon and Levi were successful. Why was he upset? Because it was not moral, it was pragmatic. He thought that there could be a tremendous ramification, that they could all rise up, all of the neighbors, against this small little Jewish people. There was no, quote unquote, the word that we're using today, deterrence, right? Deterrence. And well, after October 7th, the deterrence of the state of Israel was at an all-time low. And since the past year, Baruch Hashem, Israel has regained the deterrence. And not only has it regained the deterrence, Baruch Hashem, we're wiping out our enemies. We're wiping out our enemies. And finally, what's the danger of this shidduch? One word, assimilation. So those are the 2 points that the Rav makes in studying this whole parak, Lamed Dalet Chamishi in Vayishlach. I think it's ramifications for us Ara Yom Hazeh, with enormous lessons that resonate with us today as we experience all that we're experiencing both in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. Once again, the Rav is just utterly brilliant, but he doesn't need my haskama. Yes, Rita.
So why on his deathbed, Yaakov sort of cursed Shimon and Levi?
Yeah, Yaakov, because they didn't converse with him. They didn't communicate. There was no communication. And by the way, Nechama Leibovitz says, how many years separate? What do they say? I'll show you one other thing here. Take a look at the very end of the parak. Go to page 184, Pasuk Lamed and Lamed Aleph. So Lamed, Yaakov calls them in and he says, you caused me a tremendous problem. You're going to make me, they're going to come after us. And that's full and they're going to be nishmati. They're going to come and attack me. I'm a small people and we're going to be wiped out. What did they answer? The next pasuk, Lamed Aleph, Vayomru, Shimon and Levi turned to their father and they say what? Are we going to allow our sister to be turned into a harlot? What does Yaakov respond? Nothing. For 40 years, nothing. He becomes silent. Why don't we get an answer? We get an answer, as Rita notes, at the very end of Chumash Bereshis, in Vayechi, when he's talking to Shimon the Levi, and he gives the bracha to them. What does he say? So he says, Shimon and Levi? 276, okay. Shimon the Levi achim klei chamos mecharoseim b'sodom al tavo nafshi b'kolom al teichad kivodi. He says, don't count me in on your strategies. I'm not part of it. It's fascinating, right? Why did it take 40 plus years for him to talk? So Nechama Leibovitz Zichronah Livracha has a brilliant answer. She said, what was their answer to him? He gave a pragmatic answer. You're going to cause me real problems with our neighbors. There's no deterrence. How am I going to fight? They realize we're just a few. Yaakov was actually wrong in his calculation. Shimon and Levi were correct. Yaakov was wrong. So what was their mistake? Their mistake was they didn't communicate with their father. They had to have convinced their father that this is a very important thing to respond to it. But they didn't. But what did they give as an answer? Moral indignation. Nechama Leibovitz writes, when you throw in an argument to your opponent, moral indignation, the opponent has nothing to say. The conversation ends. There is nothing to talk. What was Yaakov talking about? Yaakov was talking about a pragmatic approach to fighting an enemy. How do you deal with an enemy? You prepare, strategize, you communicate, you get into the war room, if you will, right? And you plan the strategy. What did you guys do? You didn't do that. You acted, so he's thinking. You acted with impulse.
Actually, they planned it. They had 3 days after the meal. They planned it for when they were.
But you're looking at through Yaakov's eyes.
No, I'm looking at.
No, I'm saying, look through Yaakov's eyes. Yaakov doesn't think that they planned it well. You should have conversed with me. You should have talked to me. That's what he's saying. But what?
He kind of discouraged them.
That's correct.
They didn't want to.
So, I think Yaakov also is saying, you're young punks. You're young. I'm a survivor of love. I know how to deal with these guys. Why didn't you come and converse with me? You're so young. You think, it's the youth knows everything. Why did you have a conversation between me and you? There was no conversation between me and you. He wasn't asking for process. He was saying, I needed to be here. I needed to hear you. You needed to hear me. That's how you create strategy. You don't, part of us work without the second part. You work as a united front. So he kept quiet for 40 years, and he waits till when? Why? Because now I have the advantage. Now get literally and figuratively the last word. And you're going to listen. You're going to listen because now you're going to hear my moral indignation. Right? Right? But when it's an interesting perspective, when somebody throws at you an argument of moral indignation, it is true, by the way. I know in my rabbinic life, if somebody throws in my face in a conversation, Rabbi, you're not acting from enough, the conversation's over. There's nothing further to talk about. You don't think I'm from enough? Okay, I'm not from enough. There's no answer. There's no answer to you're going to turn our sister into a hairline? No matter what I'm going to answer, there's no answer for you that is going to satisfy you. That's what Nehemiah says. Yaakov is brilliant. He realized there was no further conversation because in such an argument, you can't answer your opponent.
It's an argument. It's an irrational argument.
It's an irrational. Correct. I do think, however, when we look back at this story, Yaakov's concerns were not accurate. Yaakov's concerns were not, and we shall ask, who was right in this gamble? Shimon and Levi were right. They ended up with history on their side and not history on the side of Yaakov.
His fears never materialized.
No, Baruch Hashem, they didn't. They didn't. So Shimon and Levi were right. It's the same thing that you have the arguments. I'm telling you, Mamish, this is Bayom Hazeh, right now. We see it. We've seen it over the past year. We were so petrified of Hezbollah, right? That Hezbollah, if we ratchet up the problem with, look what happened for a whole year. They were throwing these rockets at us, rockets. It took until 1 year into this that we finally figured out how we're going to get them. And then the beepers going off, the pagers going off. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant strategy, but we realized we got to cut off the head. We got to cut off the head. Mm-hmm. And we went after, what?
The head is around.
We're going to go after. I think that's, now I think, what do I know? I just assume that the Israeli government and the Trump administration are already in conversation about what to do. Hopefully, they can unite and they can tackle this terrible enemy of society, of humanity, hopefully. I mean, Yaakov Katz had a brilliant interview. Yaakov Katz is the one, he was editor of Jerusalem Post for many years, but Yaakov Katz, more important, is a brilliant journalist when it comes to military issues. He was the correspondent for many, many years on military. He wrote authoritative work, and it's worth reading. It's a page turner. He's a brilliant writer. Get a hold of it on Amazon. The book on how Israel destroyed the reactor in Syria. It's unbelievable story. The authoritative story about how Israel went after the reactor that was being built with the help of North Korea in Israel. Yaakov Katz. And every week you can get Yaakov Katz online. He writes an article. It's brilliant. Just Google him. He has an analysis of the week on Friday. Anyhow, and he's interviewed all over. And Yaakov Katz said, Danny Gordis had a piece with him. Yaakov Katz said, it's a no-brainer now that Israel should go after Iran. It's just a no-brainer. Now's the time to go after the nuclear sites. It's time. And now we can do it. Hashem Yazor. Okay, we'll pick up next week.
I just want to make one comment. The thing what you were saying before about the people that in Shem, the bystander is in a real pickle because it's not such a neutral position at all, because he is really in a position of choose your moral position over your physical safety. Because if you are going to remain silent, right, then there you go, you're going to be killed. But if you're right when the enemy comes to attack, but you're facing a tyrant in most cases with the bystander, and so you're scared.
Of course, there's a fear, but you have to
but
round
way,
up. That's
right.
leadership.
Either way,
that's leadership.
Either the tyrant will get you, or the enemy might. Right?
Well,
But you can't. Enemy will.
But you can't. The halacha is saying, but you can't. Judaism is saying you cannot remain quiet. You have to respond.
That. I'm just saying.
Okay.
How difficult
it is. Difficult. It is difficult. He's
not in any neutral position whatsoever. He's in a very.
It's difficult. Right. Okay, we'll pick up next week on the next parsha for another discussion that will guarantee to promote a fascinating discussion. Yeah. Okay, everybody should have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're talking about mother.